The pristine terrace of Willowbrook Country Club overlooked 18 holes of championship golf, but the view had lost its charm the moment my Uncle Martin decided to turn our annual family reunion into a public tribunal. Two security guards in crisp uniforms appeared at the French doors leading from the main dining room, their polished shoes clicking against the Italian marble as they approached our table. "Ms. Davidson?" The lead security officer addressed me with professional deference. "You requested assistance?" "Yes, thank you, James," I replied, not taking my eyes off my uncle's increasingly pale face. "Please escort Mr. Martin Davidson and his immediate family from the premises. They're no longer welcome at Willowbrook." The confidence that had radiated from my uncle just moments before, when he'd proclaimed that I was a disgrace to the Davidson name, and no longer part of this family, evaporated like morning dew on the golf course below. His mouth opened and closed several times, producing no sound except a faint gasping noise that reminded me of a fish out of water. "There must be some mistake," my Aunt Patricia interjected, her voice climbing toward the pitch she typically reserved for arguing with department store clerks. "We're members here. We've been members for 15 years. James consulted his tablet with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Davidson, your membership was actually sponsored by Ms. Samantha Davidson's membership tier. As the Platinum founding member, she has full authority over guest privileges and sponsored memberships." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of golf clubs striking balls and the gentle splash of the pool fountain. Around our table 23 family members, cousins, aunts, uncles and various spouses, stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to dawning comprehension. My cousin Trevor, Martin's eldest son, finally found his voice. "Samantha, what does he mean by Platinum founding member?" "It means I'm one of the 7 individuals who provided the initial capital investment when Willowbrook was developed 12 years ago," I explained calmly, cutting another piece of my salmon as if billionaire revelations were a regular feature of our family gatherings. "My investment of $45 million secured lifetime membership privileges and certain administrative authorities." $45 million? My cousin Lisa's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble terrace and sending Pinot Grigio splashing across her designer dress. "Samantha, you don't have $45 million. I pulled out my phone and opened my primary investment account, the screen displaying a balance that made several relatives audibly gasp. $127.3 million in liquid assets, with a note indicating this represented approximately 15% of my total portfolio. "This is one of my smaller accounts," I clarified, holding the phone so everyone could see the numbers. "It's primarily for day-to-day expenses and short-term investments." The explanation was met with the kind of stunned silence typically reserved for natural disasters or celebrity sightings. My Uncle Martin, who had been so confident in his moral authority when he declared me no longer family, now looked like someone had explained to him that gravity was optional. "This is impossible," he stammered, his face cycling through several shades of red before settling on an alarming purple. "You work at some nonprofit. You drive a 5-year-old Subaru. You live in that tiny apartment downtown." "I founded and run a nonprofit," I corrected. "The Global Education Initiative, which has distributed over $800 million in educational funding to underserved communities across 43 countries. The Subaru is reliable and environmentally responsible. And I live downtown because I enjoy urban conveniences and walkable neighborhoods." What I didn't mention was that my tiny apartment was actually a 4,000 square foot penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of one of the city's most exclusive residential buildings. A building I had purchased 3 years ago and converted into luxury condominiums. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. "Sam, the UN Education Summit confirmation just came through. Secretary General wants to discuss the $200 million Rural Education Initiative. Also, Warren Buffett's office called about the charity dinner next month." I turned the phone so the table could see the message. "The United Nations wants to discuss my latest education funding proposal. Warren Buffett and I serve on the same charitable board." "Warren Buffett," my cousin David whispered, his voice carrying the same reverence typically reserved for religious figures. "We've been collaborating on education initiatives for the past 3 years," I replied. "He's quite passionate about improving educational access in developing countries." My Uncle Martin, who had regained some of his composure, attempted to reassert control over the situation. Samantha, even if this is real, which I find hard to believe, it doesn't change what you've done to this family. What exactly have I done to this family, Uncle Martin? You've embarrassed us. Your lifestyle choices, your associations, they reflect poorly on the Davidson name. There it was, the real reason for his dramatic declaration of disownment. Not my financial status or my charitable work, but my lifestyle choices and associations. For Martin Davidson, a man who had built his identity around country club memberships and social standing, having a niece who was openly gay and actively involved in progressive causes was a source of persistent embarrassment. You mean my relationship with Jennifer? I said, cutting through his euphemisms. You're embarrassed that I'm gay and that I use my wealth to support causes you disagree with. I'm embarrassed that you flaunt your preferences in public and associate with radical activists who want to destroy traditional values. The radical activists he was referring to included Nobel Peace Prize winners, internationally respected educators and human rights advocates. But in Martin's worldview, anyone who supported marriage equality, educational access, or climate change action was automatically classified as a dangerous extremist. Jennifer and I have been together for 4 years, I replied evenly. We're engaged, we're building a life together, and we're planning to adopt children. If that embarrasses you, Uncle Martin, perhaps the problem isn't with my choices but with your values. It's not natural, my Aunt Patricia chimed in, her voice carrying the righteous conviction of someone who had never questioned her own assumptions. Marriage is between a man and a woman. That's how families are built. I looked around the table at the faces of people I had known my entire life, relatives who had celebrated my birthdays, attended my graduation, and accepted my Christmas gifts without ever questioning where my modest lifestyle intersected with my apparent generosity. Aunt Patricia, I said quietly, my relationship with Jennifer is built on love, mutual respect, and shared values. We've been together longer than 3 of your 4 marriages combined. We're more committed to each other than most of the heterosexual couples in this family. The observation hit its mark. Patricia's face flushed red as several cousins shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, probably thinking about their own relationship track records. My phone rang with a call from the governor's office. I considered declining it, but something about the timing felt appropriate. Governor Williams' office, I answered, putting the call on speaker. This is Samantha Davidson. Ms. Davidson, this is Margaret Chen from the governor's education policy team. The governor wanted to personally thank you for the $50 million commitment to the state university system. The scholarship program you've funded will allow us to provide full rides to over 2,000 students from low-income families. It's my pleasure, Margaret. Education should be accessible regardless of economic background. The governor also wanted to discuss your proposal for the Rural Broadband Education Initiative. When would you be available for a meeting? I'll have my assistant coordinate with your office next week, I replied. And please tell the governor that I'm honored to support his education agenda. After ending the call, I looked around the table at faces that registered everything from awe to confusion to something that might have been shame. $50 million to the state university system, my cousin Jennifer, not my fiancée but Martin's daughter, said faintly. Samantha, how much money do you actually have? Enough to fund educational initiatives that matter to me, I replied. My current net worth is approximately $840 million, not including the value of the foundation's assets. The number seemed to echo across the terrace like a thunderclap. $840 million was more money than most of my relatives would encounter in their combined lifetimes, yet they had just spent the past hour lecturing me about my life choices and moral failings. 800 million, Uncle Martin repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Give or take 50 million depending on market fluctuations, I confirmed. The portfolio is diversified across technology investments, real estate holdings, and educational ventures. James, the security officer, cleared his throat diplomatically. Ms. Davidson, would you like us to proceed with the escort or? I looked at my Uncle Martin, who had deflated like a punctured balloon. The man who had been so confident in his moral authority 30 minutes ago now looked like a child who had been caught lying about his homework. Actually, James, let's hold off on the escort. But I would like you to revise the membership protocols. From now on, sponsored memberships require my personal approval for any family gatherings or events. Of course, Ms. Davidson. I'll update the records immediately. After James left, the table remained silent except for the distant sounds of golf and tennis. My Uncle Martin stared at his untouched prime rib like it might contain answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. Uncle Martin, I said quietly, you declared that I'm no longer family because you're embarrassed by who I am and who I love. You're embarrassed by my support for human rights, educational access, and environmental protection. You're embarrassed that I don't conform to your narrow definition of what a Davidson should be. He didn't respond, but his shoulders sagged in a way that suggested he was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. What you failed to realize, I continued, is that I've spent the past 8 years building something that honors the best values our family claims to represent. I've created educational opportunities for thousands of children who wouldn't otherwise have them. I've funded research that's improving lives around the world. I've used my resources to make the world more equitable and more just. My cousin David leaned forward, his expression serious for the first time all evening. Samantha, I owe you an apology. When you came out 4 years ago, I said some things. You said that I was choosing a lifestyle that would prevent me from having a real family, I reminded him. You suggested that I was being selfish and that I would regret my choices when I was older and alone. I was wrong. You were prejudiced, I corrected gently. There's a difference. Wrong implies you didn't have enough information. Prejudiced means you made judgments based on bias rather than evidence. The distinction was important to me because it addressed the deeper issue underlying our family's dynamics. They hadn't rejected me because of careful consideration of my life choices. They had rejected me because my existence challenged their assumptions about sexuality, family, and success. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from Jennifer. How's the family reunion going? Remember, we have dinner with my parents at 7. They're excited to discuss wedding plans. I showed the text to the table. My fiancé is wondering how the reunion is going. Her parents are hosting us for dinner tonight to discuss our wedding plans. Wedding plans? My Aunt Patricia asked, her voice much smaller than it had been earlier. Jennifer and I are getting married next spring. Small ceremony, close friends and family only. We're also in the process of adopting 2 siblings, brother and sister, ages 7 and 9, whose parents died in a car accident. The information seemed to hit them like cold water. 4 months, they had been constructing narratives about my lifestyle and its implications for family values, never bothering to learn the actual details of my life. You're adopting children, my mother said softly. She had been quiet throughout most of the confrontation, probably trying to navigate between her brother's prejudices and her daughter's unexpected revelations. We're providing a home for children who need one, I replied. Emma and Michael have been in foster care for 8 months. They need stability, love, and educational opportunities. Jennifer and I can provide all of those things. My Uncle Martin finally found his voice again, though it came out cracked and uncertain. Samantha, I didn't know about the children. Or the charitable work. Or, you didn't know because you never asked, I interrupted. You were so busy being embarrassed by my sexual orientation that you never bothered to learn about my actual life, my values, or my contributions to the world. But why didn't you tell us about the money? About your success? It was a fair question with a complicated answer. Because I wanted to know who would accept me for who I am rather than what I have. I wanted to understand which family members would support me when they thought I was just a non-profit worker driving a Subaru, and which ones would only show respect after learning about my bank account. The observation hung in the air like smoke, heavy with implications that everyone could understand but no one wanted to acknowledge directly. My cousin Lisa, who had been quietly cleaning wine stains from her dress, looked up with tears in her eyes. Samantha, I'm sorry. About everything. About not supporting you when you came out, about not asking about your work, about not being a better cousin. Lisa, you don't need to apologize for your feelings or your beliefs. But you do need to acknowledge that your assumptions about my life were wrong and that your treatment of me was hurtful. Over the next hour, the conversation gradually shifted from confrontation to something resembling reconciliation. Not everyone was ready to abandon their prejudices, but most of my relatives seemed genuinely shocked to learn how wrong their assumptions had been. My cousin Trevor asked thoughtful questions about my charitable work. My Aunt Susan wanted to understand the adoption process. Even Patricia, despite her earlier comments about marriage, inquired politely about wedding plans. But Uncle Martin remained largely silent, probably trying to reconcile his moral certainty with the growing evidence that his judgments had been completely misguided. As the evening wound down and relatives began leaving, Martin approached me privately. "Samantha, I owe you an apology. Not just for tonight but for the past 4 years." "What specifically are you apologizing for, Uncle Martin?" "For treating you like you were broken instead of celebrating who you are. For being embarrassed by your relationship instead of being proud of your happiness. For assuming that your life choices were wrong instead of recognizing that you've built something extraordinary." It was more honesty than I'd expected from him, and it suggested genuine remorse rather than just damage control. "Uncle Martin, I don't need you to change your beliefs overnight. But I do need you to treat me with respect and to acknowledge that my life has value and meaning." "It does," he said quietly. "I can see that now. I wish I had seen it sooner." 6 months later, Martin and Patricia attended my wedding to Jennifer in the gardens behind my downtown penthouse. They sat in the front row with my parents, and Martin walked me down the aisle when my father was delayed by flight cancellations. During his toast at the reception, he talked about family, acceptance, and the importance of measuring people by their character rather than their conformity. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was progress. Emma and Michael, the children Jennifer and I adopted, call Martin Uncle Marty, and have no idea that he once thought their family structure was problematic. To them, he's just the relative who brings elaborate gifts and tells stories about my childhood. The real victory wasn't the financial revelation or even my uncle's eventual acceptance. It was the knowledge that I had built a life based on my own values rather than others' expectations, and that this life included both extraordinary professional success and deep personal fulfillment. Sometimes the most important inheritance isn't money. It's the courage to define family on your own terms while using your resources to create the kind of world you want to live in.